Chicago. A place where the city's wealthy and poor blur into an uncertain middle ground, neither completely safe nor entirely criminal. But there are certain streets that are never marked as dangerous on any map. You just feel it. Chicago hadn't fully woken up yet. 4:17 a.m. The sky was neither completely dark nor light. You know those uncertain shades of gray, the kind that create an uneasiness inside you. The street lamps were still on. Their yellow glow shimmered faintly over the wet asphalt. The light rain that had fallen throughout the night had just stopped. The air felt suffocating. And that narrow alley, it felt completely cut off from the rest of the city. Compressed between two tall buildings, a forgotten space. Not a single window, not a single balcony. The walls were blind. The only things facing into the alley were large rusted garbage containers. The first person to notice it was a sanitation worker. His name didn't matter, because after what he saw that morning, nothing in his life would ever be the same again. As he approached the containers, his steps suddenly slowed, because on the ground there was something. At first, he thought it was just trash, but it wasn't. The shape was wrong. The human eye recognizes the human form very quickly, and he recognized it. It was a body lying on the ground, on its back. Arms spread out to the sides, legs slightly bent, but the most disturbing thing was the stillness. The worker took a few more steps forward. His breathing grew heavier, his heart was racing, and then he saw the face, Jason Cliff, but he was no longer alive. His eyes were half open, frozen, empty, as if, in his final moments, he had seen something, but died before he could understand what it was. His face was covered in blood, but the blood had not spread. This was not the sign of a struggle. The worker staggered back, trembling, but his eyes locked onto the neck, and in that moment, reality cracked inside his mind. On Jason's throat, there was only a single cut, deep, clean, and disturbingly precise, as if someone, without hesitation, with a single motion, knowing exactly what they were doing, had ended his life. The surroundings were silent, too silent. More than normal, even in a city. This kind of silence didn't exist. The man looked around. There was nothing. No footprints, no blood splatter, no signs of a struggle. As if nothing had happened in that alley. But there was a body on the ground, and what was even more strange was the amount of blood. A cut this deep should have left far more blood. But the blood present was less than expected. This meant only one thing. Jason may have died somewhere else. When the police arrived, the sun had not yet risen. Blue and red lights echoed across the walls of the alley. One of the detectives knelt down to examine the body. He adjusted his gloves and spoke in a low voice.
This is a clean job.
What does that mean?
This isn't a fight. This is a choice.
The crime scene team worked for hours, but the result did not change. Nothing was found. At one point, one of the officers focused on the wall, right behind the container. On the dirty, damp concrete, there was a very faint mark, as if something had been leaning against it, but it wasn't clear what it was. And at that moment, there was something else no one noticed. In the darkest corner of the alley, where the light couldn't reach, for a brief moment, a shadow resembling a human form appeared. It stood still, silent, and it was there. Then, it disappeared. The police noticed nothing, heard nothing, felt nothing. But that alley, that morning, did not witness only a murder. Something else was there, and this was a beginning no one had yet realized. Chicago. Even though the sun had risen, the city still looked gray. The clouds hung low. There was light, but no warmth. Edgar Blackwood's office was located on the third floor of a forgotten building in one of the city's worn-out districts. The hallways were silent. The wooden floor creaked softly with every step, as if the building remembered those who walked inside it. Edgar opened the door. As always, the same movements, the same order, but that day, he paused the moment he stepped inside. There was a file on his desk. It hadn't been there the night before. He was certain of it. Because Edgar Blackwood had an obsession, order, and someone had interfered with it. The file was brown, old-fashioned, its corners slightly worn. There was no official stamp on it, only a name written in black ink, Jason Cliff. Edgar closed the door, locked it, slowly walked toward his desk. Every step was careful, but his eyes never left the file. He reached the desk. For a moment, he just looked at it. He didn't touch it. Because Edgar knew one thing very well. Edgar Blackwood had an obsession. Order.
If a file reaches you, either someone is asking for your help, or they're pulling you into something.
Finally, he sat down. He didn't take off his coat, nor his hat. He lit a cigarette, let the first smoke drift slowly, and opened the file. First page, crime scene photographs, Jason Cliff. On the ground, lifeless, the cut on his neck was disturbing even in the photo. Edgar leaned a little closer to the image, narrowed his eyes. Something was wrong, but what? He turned the page. Autopsy report. Cause of death, throat slashing. Estimated time of death, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. Signs of struggle, none. Edgar's brows slightly furrowed, no struggle. This was not something he was used to. A person reacts when their throat is cut. Reflex, instinct, the will to survive. But here, there was nothing. Edgar took another drag from his cigarette, lightly turned the ashtray, and noticed a note on the side. In small handwriting at the edge of the page.
Clean job. Possibly professional.
Edgar's lips curled slightly.
No, this isn't professional.
As the pages continued, Jason's life began to unfold. Petty crimes, street fights, bullying, threats. But what disturbed Edgar was something else. It was impossible for there to be no enemies. Someone like Jason had to be either deeply liked or deeply hated. There was no middle ground. But in the file, there was no one. Edgar leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, reconstructed the scene in his mind. The alley, darkness, silence, a man, a knife. But something was missing. At that moment, the light in the room flickered slightly. Edgar opened his eyes, lifted his head, looked at the ceiling. The lamp was in place, but the light was unstable. Then, his eyes slowly shifted to the wall, and in that moment, time froze. Edgar's shadow was clearly visible on the wall, but it wasn't alone. Right beside it, there was another silhouette. It looked human, but not entirely. Its head seemed distorted, as if its shape was unfinished. It blurred outward at the edges. Edgar didn't move, didn't breathe. He just stared. The shadow made a very slight movement, but it was definitely doing something. Edgar suddenly jumped to his feet, turned toward the light, then looked back at the wall. There was nothing. The room was silent. Only the clock ticked. Edgar remained motionless for a few seconds, then slowly sat down again. But this time, it was different. His eyes were no longer on the file. They were on the walls. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. But Edgar knew one thing. This was not the first time, and it would not be the last. He returned to the file. When he reached the last page, his heart beat slightly faster. A small note, unofficial, not typed, handwritten.
This is not an ordinary murder.
Edgar studied the note for a long time. The ink was fresh. This file had been prepared recently, but it wasn't an official document, which meant someone had delivered this file specifically to him. Edgar extinguished his cigarette, stood up, walked toward the window, pulled the curtain aside. Below, Chicago flowed endlessly. Cars, crowds of people dot the rhythm of life, but Edgar felt something different within that crowd. There was an invisible connection. This murder was not ordinary. This file was not a coincidence, and that shadow was not an illusion. Edgar looked at his own reflection on the glass, and for a very brief moment, behind his reflection, he noticed a movement. He quickly turned his head. There was nothing. But this time, he wasn't sure. He returned to his desk, adjusted his hat properly, buttoned his coat, and whispered,
This case found me.
And in Chicago, there are some cases, you don't solve them. They choose you. One of Chicago's gray neighborhoods, neither truly poor nor comfortable. A place where people struggle to survive, but no one truly lives. When Edgar Blackwood stepped into that neighborhood, the first thing he felt was the stares. People didn't know him, but he was a stranger. And in this neighborhood, strangers either cause trouble or become it. The streets were narrow. The buildings were old. The walls were dirty, the windows worn and tired. Some were completely darkened from the inside, as if the people within had cut off all connection with the outside world. Edgar walked forward slowly. He wasn't in a hurry, because in places like this, moving fast meant drawing attention. His first stop was a small grocery store. The bell on the door rang. Inside there was a dim light. The man behind the counter glanced at Edgar. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Edgar took a photo out of his pocket. Jason Cliff. He placed it on the counter. The man didn't even look at the photo. He just took a drag from his cigarette and slowly said,
There are a lot of faces like that around here.
But he's not alive anymore.
That sentence changed the atmosphere. The man finally looked at the photo. His eyebrows moved slightly. He recognized him, but he didn't want to say it out loud. Edgar took a banknote from his pocket, placed it on the table. Silence. The man examined the money, then looked back at Jason's photo and slightly nodded.
He was a troubled kid.
What kind of trouble?
The man took a deep breath. It was clear he didn't want to talk about the past, but some stories don't come out with money. They come out by carrying weight.
He got into people's lives.
For no reason?
No, there was a reason.
What was it?
This time, the man looked directly into Edgar's eyes and said something very simple.
Control.
Who was Jason Cliff? Jason was not just a thug. He was someone who found people's weak points. He didn't hesitate to bully others, but not randomly. He chose his targets. The quiet ones, the ones who couldn't defend themselves, the lonely ones. And then, he would slowly close in. Physical violence was his last stage. His real weapon was his mind. He would watch someone for days, learn when they were alone, who they were afraid of, what they valued, and then, when he touched, he struck. Second witness. Edgar stepped out of the store, but that wasn't enough. Jason's past was more complicated. A group of young men appeared at the corner of the street. They were smoking, laughing. But when Edgar approached, they fell silent. Edgar showed the same photo again. This time, one of them laughed, but that laugh was not a smile.
Guess someone finally got rid of him.
What do you mean?
Nothing.
Edgar didn't step closer. He just waited. Silence. Makes people talk, and it worked. Another one spoke.
Jason messed with everyone.
Everyone?
No, but he messed with some people too much.
Who?
The young men looked at each other. There was a brief hesitation. Then one of them whispered.
Donald.
For the first time, a concrete name. Jason's dark side. Edgar continued walking through the neighborhood. Every conversation led to the same point. Jason wasn't just someone who caused trouble. He was someone who made people's lives harder. A woman said,
I would change my path when I saw him. Just being around him ruined your mood.
And most importantly, no one was sad. No one said, what a shame. That said a lot, the missing piece. But what disturbed Edgar was something else. There were many people who hated Jason, but none of them openly admitted fearing him. That was a contradiction. Because real fear cannot be hidden. It leaks out. But here, something had been covered up, and that made Edgar uneasy. Traces of the shadow. Edgar returned to the alley. To where Jason had been. It was daytime. But the darkness in the street still remained. He looked at the walls, the containers, the ground, and then his eyes caught something. On the corner of the wall, a very faint mark, human-sized, as if someone had been standing there for a while. But it wasn't just a stain, it was an absence, as if light had never reached that spot. Edgar slowly stepped closer. He extended his hand toward the wall. Just as he was about to touch it, he hesitated. A strange feeling rose inside him, a familiar sensation, but impossible to describe. And at that moment, he sensed a movement behind him. He quickly turned around. No one was there, but when he looked down, his heart stopped for a moment. There were two shadows. One belonged to him, the other did not. Edgar blinked. The second shadow slowly disappeared. Edgar took a deep breath, looked around the alley one more time. Now he was certain Jason Cliff had gotten involved with the wrong people. But the one who killed him was not just one person. In this story, there was something unseen, and Edgar felt it more clearly than ever before.
This murder is only the beginning.
Donald Redrock. This name was a whisper in the neighborhood, not out of fear, not out of respect, but from a kind of uneasiness. Edgar observed him for the first time from a distance, at a bus stop. He was standing within the crowd, but didn't seem like a part of it. Donald was ordinary, average height. He looked thin. He had a pale face. His hair was messy. But what made him different were his eyes. They didn't look empty, but they weren't full either, as if he had been holding things inside for a long time. Edgar didn't take his eyes off him as Donald waited for the bus. He didn't interact with anyone. No one approached him, and most importantly, no one looked at him. This was the trait of invisible people, a silent life. When you looked into Donald's past, at first glance, there was nothing. No criminal record, no fights, no sign of any trouble. He had a clean past, too clean. But Edgar used to say,
Some people don't commit crimes because they haven't been broken yet.
Donald's life followed a simple routine. He went to work in the morning, returned home in the evening. Occasionally met with his girlfriend, but this ordinariness revealed that something was being hidden. The first crack. Everything began with something small. Jason Cliff noticed Donald. Why? Simply because Donald's girlfriend, Emily, had once been in a relationship with Jason. A short one, but for Jason, it was unfinished business. When Jason learned about this, he smiled, and that smile was the sign of a beginning. The anatomy of bullying. At first, Jason didn't attack Donald. He waited. First step, a look. A long, uncomfortable stare. Second step, a word, said in passing, in a tone meant to be heard.
You look familiar.
Third step, a laugh, with others. But his eyes were on Donald. Then, it became a habit. Jason slowly embedded himself into Donald's life. He was there after work. He was there at the cafe. He was there on the street. He gave the impression that he was doing nothing, but in reality, he was doing everything. Mental collapse. The bullying grew, but not physically. Jason spoke.
I knew her before you did. Some things don't change. People don't like giving up their habits.
These words were carved into Donald's mind. He could no longer sleep. Even while talking to Emily, Jason was in his mind. His words, his gaze, his presence, constantly, relentlessly. And worst of all, what if Jason was right? That thought was what tore Donald apart, the first physical contact. One night, Jason finally crossed the line, in a narrow street. He blocked Donald's path. This time, he was alone. He smiled. But there was something different. In that smile,
I'm interested in you.
Donald stayed silent. Jason stepped closer, very close, and whispered,
When you look into her eyes, you see me, don't you?
Donald's breath caught. Jason lightly touched his shoulder. But that touch was more powerful than a blow. And as he walked away, he left his final sentence behind.
Killing you slowly is more fun.
The breaking point is not a sudden event. It develops slowly, it moves in silence, and it goes unnoticed. That's how it was for Donald. Internal collapse. Days passed. Weeks passed. Donald was no longer the same person. He spoke less. He slept less. Less happened in his life. But he was thinking. Constantly. And those thoughts always led to the same point.
I have to stop this.
The wrong solution. At first, Donald thought about running away, changing cities, leaving his job, ending his relationship with Emily, but with every option, he faced the same question.
What if he doesn't leave me alone?
Jason was no longer just a person. He was a shadow. And shadows go everywhere. The transformation begins one night. Donald looked into the mirror for a long time. He looked at his own face like a stranger, and for the first time, he said this to himself.
It's either him or me.
At that moment, everything began to change. The plan. Donald didn't decide immediately. He made a plan for days. For weeks, he observed Jason when he was alone, where he went, who he saw, what he drank, when he got drunk. He learned everything. And most importantly, he discovered Jason's weak point. His overconfidence, putting on the mask, Donald changed. But from the outside, everything looked the same. It even looked better. One day, he approached Jason, by his own choice. Jason was surprised, but he didn't show it. Donald spoke.
Let's end this.
And what?
The nonsense.
This pleased Jason, because it felt like control had returned. The final step. Donald gained his trust. Within days, Jason's guard dropped, and finally, that night came. Donald called him to the alley. The reason? A meaningless conversation. Jason came because he wasn't afraid, because he thought he would win. But that night, for the first time, he made a mistake. The breaking moment. The street was silent. They were in the same alley. Jason was talking, but Donald was no longer listening. His heart was calm. That was the most terrifying part. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was calmness. Donald slowly stepped closer. Jason was still talking, and in that moment, Donald thought one last time.
This has to end.
And he moved. A single motion, silent, precise. Jason's eyes widened, shock, but it was too late. Blood flowed. But there was no scream, because Donald had calculated everything. When Jason fell to the ground, Donald just looked at him. For a long time, and for the first time, the voices in his head went silent, but something else took their place. Silence. Deep, heavy, and in that moment, Donald understood.
This is something you can't come back from.
Donald walked out of that alley. He didn't look back. But there was something he didn't know. That night, in that alley, there weren't just two people. There was something else. And that thing was watching what Donald did, and now, it was watching someone else. Edgar Blackwood. Chicago nights do not hide certain truths, they simply make them more visible. When Edgar Blackwood returned to his office that night, the city had grown quiet. The sound of cars had faded, the noise of people had disappeared. The only thing left was the rustling of the wind as it moved through narrow streets. He opened the door, stepped inside, and paused. The room was the same, but what it made him feel was different. His desk, the files, the ashtray, everything was in its place. But Edgar's eyes went directly to the wall. The shadow was gone, but this did not give him comfort, because now he knew.
Not seeing it doesn't mean it's gone.
Without taking off his coat, Edgar sat at his desk. He opened the Jason Cliff file again, but this time, not to read, to understand. Thinking in silence, Edgar closed his eyes. He reconstructed the scene in his mind. The alley, night, silence. Jason was there, but he wasn't alone. Edgar placed himself in Jason's position, looked from his perspective. Darkness, a narrow space, no way to escape. And someone stood in front of him, but that person wasn't attacking. Not yet. Edgar's brows slightly furrowed.
This wasn't an attack. This was a wait.
The first breaking point, Edgar opened his eyes. He looked at the photos in the file again. The position of the body told a lot. Jason's arms were not in a defensive position. This meant Jason wasn't expecting an attack, but that wasn't enough. Edgar stood up. He began walking around the room. His steps were slow, but steady. His mind was active.
A person, if they are not under threat, why wouldn't they defend themselves?
The answer slowly became clear.
Because they trust the person in front of them.
Edgar stopped. This changed everything. The second breaking point, Edgar returned to the desk. He picked up the autopsy report, the amount of blood, the depth of the cut, the timing. All pointed to the same thing, a single move. This wasn't a fight. This was a decision. And the person who made that decision was not panicking. Calm, controlled, prepared. Edgar's eyes narrowed.
This isn't a moment of anger. This is a plan.
Building the chain, Edgar gathered his notes. Jason had enemies, but no one openly feared him. Donald had been bullied for a long time. Jason had started to trust him. The pieces were slowly coming together, but something was still missing. Why now? Edgar sat in his chair, closed his eyes. He thought about Donald, his posture, his eyes, his silence, and at that moment, something clicked, the truth revealed. Edgar opened his eyes. This time, his gaze was steady, certain.
This is not revenge. This is an inevitable end.
Donald hadn't run away. He had resisted, but not outwardly. Internally, and finally, he had ended the war within himself. The plan becomes clear. Edgar stood up, walked to the window, looked out over the city, and built everything step by step. Donald endured pressure for months. He studied Jason's behavior. He found his weak moment. He gained his trust. He led him to an isolated place. He killed him in a single move. There were no mistakes, no haste, no emotion. This was a cold decision. The shadow returns. At that moment, the atmosphere in the room changed. Edgar felt it. The temperature didn't drop, but the weight increased. Slowly he turned around. He looked at the wall, and this time, he couldn't escape it. The shadow was there, clear, definite. It was different. It wasn't standing still, slowly. It was mimicking Edgar's movements. But, with a delay, Edgar raised his hand. The shadow raised it a few seconds later. This was wrong. Very wrong. Edgar's breathing grew heavier, but he didn't look away. And in that moment, the shadow tilted its head. But Edgar had not done that. Silence. Then, a very faint sensation, like a voice. But unheard, like a thought. But not his.
You understood him.
Edgar's heart began to race, but he didn't step back. He whispered,
Who are you?
The shadow moved and in that moment, it disappeared. The room returned to normal, but Edgar was no longer the same. He returned to his desk, looked at the file. He had reached a definite conclusion. The person who killed Jason Cliff was Donald Redrock, but this case was not just a murder. This was a process of transformation, and Edgar had realized a far more disturbing truth.
I didn't solve this. Something was waiting for me to solve it.
Edgar lit his cigarette, took a deep breath, and slowly said,
This isn't over yet.
Night, Chicago's latest hours, 1:12 a.m. The city was still awake, but it had no voice. Edgar Blackwood paused in front of the old apartment building. He checked the address in his hand and examined the door again. There was nothing wrong. Donald Redrock. He glanced at the buildings. Darkness. Silence dominated, but this silence was not empty. It held something within. Edgar pushed the door. It was unlocked. From the moment he stepped inside, that feeling returned. He felt a slight pressure in his chest, as if the air had grown heavier, but Edgar now recognized the state. This was the thing that came with him. He walked toward the stairs. With every step, the wooden floor creaked. The sound lasted longer than expected. When he reached the second floor, he stopped. At the end of the corridor, there was a half-open door. A faint light was leaking from inside. Edgar approached quietly. His steps were silent, but his mind was thinking loudly.
This is where everything will end.
He reached the door, placed his hand on it, and at that moment, he glanced at the wall beside him. The shadow was there. Edgar's shadow, and another one, the second one, was not matching his movements. Its head looked distorted again. Edgar closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he opened them, it was gone, but that did not comfort him, because now he knew.
It gets closer when I'm not looking.
He pushed the door. The room was small, almost completely empty. There was a silhouette in front of the window. Donald Redrock. His back was turned. He was looking at the city. Edgar stepped inside, closed the door. Click. Donald began to speak.
I was expecting you.
His voice was calm, excessively calm. Edgar took a few steps.
Jason Cliff.
Yes.
You killed him.
A brief silence followed. Then, Donald slowly turned around. There was no fear on his face, no regret, only a kind of exhaustion.
Yes.
It was that simple. Edgar watched carefully. This confession was not an escape. This was pointing to an ending. Edgar walked beside the table. He scanned the surroundings. Everything was orderly. Very orderly.
You planned it.
Yes.
For a long time.
Yes.
Why didn't you run?
I did.
From where?
From myself?
Donald suddenly began speaking, but this wasn't a defense. This was the accumulation of years.
I saw him everywhere, every day, every moment. I heard his voice, the things he said to me. It wasn't just him anymore.
What do you mean?
I don't know. Sometimes, he was there even when he wasn't in the room.
A cold wave spread inside Edgar, but his expression did not change.
That night?
That night, he went silent. For the first time, he didn't say anything. He just stared, and I watched him too.
You didn't kill him because you hated him. You killed him because he broke you.
Silence. Donald's eyes didn't fill with tears, but something had collapsed.
Yes, either him or me.
At that moment, Edgar's gaze unintentionally shifted to the wall, and it was there. This time, much clearer. The shadow was right behind Edgar, but its reflection on the wall was longer, its shape more distorted, and this time, it wasn't moving. It was just standing, watching. Edgar's breathing slowed. Donald kept speaking, but Edgar was no longer fully hearing him because the shadow slowly tilted its head. Edgar had not done that. His heart began to race, but it didn't show on the outside.
It's over, isn't it?
Edgar didn't respond. His eyes were still fixed on the shadow. The shadow took a step, but there was no sound. It simply got closer. Edgar whispered,
Who are you?
What?
Edgar snapped back for a moment, slightly shook his head.
Nothing.
But it was too late, because now he was certain. This entity was communicating with him. The door suddenly opened. Police officers entered. Donald did not resist. He dropped to his knees. He said only one thing.
It's over.
But Edgar did not agree. After everyone left, Edgar stood at the doorway. He took one last look at the room. The wall was empty. The shadow was gone. But Edgar no longer believed that. He whispered slowly,
You chose me.
and at that moment, in the reflection on the glass, he saw something very briefly behind his own silhouette. Another shape. It was motionless, but it was there. That night, Edgar Blackwood caught a killer, but the real truth he would understand much later.
Some things are not hidden in the dark. Some things appear when you look at them. This is not over yet.